Deloitte's $440,000 taxpayer-funded report riddled with AI-generated errors has ignited outrage across Australia, striking deeper public trust in consultants, technology as well as government spending. For more, let's head to Sydney. We're joined by Darren Woolley from Trinity P3. Good to see you, sir. Talk to us about what has happened here. How did the AI-generated report even come to light?
Well, look, I think once it went up on the government website for the Department for Employment and Workplace Relations, it was just a matter of people starting to pick it to pieces. It's one of those things, I think we're all waiting for something like this to happen. You know, AI has promised all of these things, but you know, there's always a need, as they say, for having a human in that loop.
Yeah, I mean, the headlines, Deloitte caught using AI in the report to help government crack down on welfare after a researcher flagged hallucinations. I mean, by the grace of God go thee, obviously, because it could happen to any of us who use AI, and it's becoming more and more common. This is a particularly difficult time, though, for a consultancy firm because, as we know, the federal Albanese government hasn't exactly had a great relationship with these companies. We think of what happened to PwC recently as well.
Well, and I think that's right. You know, this is an ongoing saga in some ways. You know, PwC have had to offload their public consultancy because of it, and the loss of trust. But you know, I think there's a wider lesson for all of business, and that is, while we're rushing to the promise of AI doing things faster, cheaper, we have to remember there's still a need. You know, every time you use an AI, there's going to be a little warning telling you that you need to check the details because AIs can hallucinate, AIs can make things up, you know, so we have to have a human in the loop. And so this idea of a complete AI-driven business at this stage is still a bit of a pipe dream.
Yeah, do you think that Deloitte's partial refund is actually enough here? I mean, we're talking big money. They rely heavily on government contracts as well. They've offered to give some of the money back to the taxpayer. Is that enough, or do we need to see something more? I mean, you mentioned what happened to PwC. This probably isn't in the same. There seems to be an error, but how many checks and balances are there or not there between someone writing a report and it being tabled?
Well, and it's a good point. You know, they're offering around 20% of that original fee, but they're under a lot of pressure to actually give it all back. You know, there was calls at Senate estimates to force them to pay it all back. I'm just wondering if they're going to be holding some of that to initiate some training on how to use AI within the organisation.
You'd hope that that training would happen before you table a report using AI, though. I mean, surely. Now, I guess that the credibility, that's what it's all about, of these big consulting firms constantly being criticised and questioned at a time where the federal government's talking about bringing a lot more of that consultancy back in-house.
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons to do that. You know, building capability within government's a really important thing. You know, I know there's a political position about small government, but the actual operating and thinking should be within the public service, because if you're relying on strategy and insights to come from outside, then you know you're actually offloading it. And it's the same for all businesses, not just government, but you know, you need to own your strategy.
Yeah, and I mean, otherwise they could just ask Deloitte for whatever ChatGPT prompt they used and they could just do it themselves, right? Like maybe just hand that over and we won't need to use them in the first place. It's a pretty tricky situation for all sides on that one. All right, now Google has topped the list of tax-paying media giants in Australia, while Netflix, Dentsu and Singtel paid nothing at all, sparking debate over fairness and corporate responsibility in a billion-dollar industry. This is interesting, Darren, because it comes at a time where TV networks, media companies, Australian-owned in Australia, are struggling. They're merging with each other. They're having to. They've got massive competitors in the Netflixes of the world, the Facebooks, the Googles, etc. So they're probably going to be a bit miffed about this whole tax situation, surely.
Yeah, and it's important to consider this. You know, traditional or legacy media have huge cost bases. The first thing is you have to thank the Australian Tax Office for actually making this information available on an annual basis. And you've got to remember, this is 2024, the tax receipts have come through now. And what we're seeing is that some of the traditional or legacy media, like the Nines, have paid their tax after costs. I just think, as a pay-as-you-go taxpayer, you have to look at this list and say, I wish I was in a position to be able to write off all my costs of living before I had to then pay tax on my income. It's interesting how business pays on profit, whereas we all pay on the salary that we take on a weekly or monthly basis. But the big ones were, Facebook. They turned over 1.36 billion and paid 38 million tax on 129 million of taxable income. But I think the one that stood out for me was Netflix. How can you have 1.19 billion in revenue in Australia, $22 million in taxable income, and still pay no tax?
Well,
how does that
that's my
happen?
question. Hang on, that's my question to you. How are they getting away with this? And it's all great for the ATO to name and shame, but what are they doing?
Well, look, first of all, the ATO have proudly said that in the year of 2023 to 2024, the number of large corporations not paying any tax has dropped from 31% to 28%. Now, at that rate, hopefully we'll get down to single digits by the 2050s. They're making small incremental inroads. But what we're seeing is, there are a number of ways, obviously. The difference between revenue and profit comes down to things like depreciations, covering or recouping losses. But also there are behaviours internationally, such as transfer pricing, where some of these organisations are able to transfer profits offshore and pay them in a lower tax regime, such as Ireland.
Yeah, you'd think Ireland would be full of huge corporate towers, given how many businesses are apparently based there, but not to be, of course. Now, as we say, we've got the pictures there of Channel 7 on screen, but if you are a Channel 7 or a Kerry Stokes, or we're hearing from Michael Miller, the CEO of News Corp, the threat of AI, but the international threat to what's happening in local markets, we're using Australia as an example, but it's happening right around the world. How do you feel about that? Is this a case of US tech giants are just going global and they're taking over? And if you're a smaller, you once used to be big, Channel 9 and Channel 7 were huge. And now obviously 7 is being essentially taken over by a radio network. What does this say about where things are at for local networks?
Well, look, there is definitely a discrepancy, and the big players have more resources and more ability to be able to minimise their tax contributions in this country. And look, that's a global problem that governments everywhere are trying to address. The thing is that also legacy media businesses particularly have high cost base because, they're either producing content, and this, to Michael Miller's point that he made in his speech recently, is that the cost of creating that IP is often being ripped off by these large tech platforms. And there has to be a way to compensate them for the use of their IP. Even small businesses like my own, Google's AI summaries have effectively stopped people finding my business because all of the content we provide online appears as a summary now, and there's a very small click-through rate through to the website to find out more because people are getting the information they need. It's become the same with news. They're taking news feeds and summarising them using AI. But the real pity is that they then use that content to sell advertising, and that is taking a share from what is already a relatively limited pool.
We don't have much time left, but I guess the issue with that is it feels like the horse has already bolted here. And as we know, businesses will always be steps ahead of government in terms of regulation. Just quickly, do you think the government will ever be able to catch up? You say what should be done, but will it be done?
Yeah, look, it's one of those issues that has to be done on a global basis, because as soon as one country, such as Australia, tightens down on tax regimes, tightens down on copyright law, or maintains the copyright law as it is, these businesses can then make decisions to move offshore to what they see as friendlier governments. And that's
Yeah.
always the balance that governments walking along, trying to make that happen, is how do you achieve your goals without then sacrificing those services to the community?
Question.
And you can even see that with the government pushing ahead with 16-year-old limits. Anyone under
Darren, I've
16
got to
not
end you
being
there,
able
I'm
to
afraid.
social
We
media.
are out of time, I'm afraid, but a whole other topic maybe for next week. Appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.